Because, and I'm sorry to burst this bubble, ideas can't be protected under IPRs because what IPRs protect is the expression of creativity, not the idea of creativity itself. Now, I know this has potentially caused a little bit of confusion, so let's talk about it. Hello, and welcome back to the Sum of Everything podcast, where we discuss a little bit of a lot of topics. I'm your host, Aishwarya. And a couple days ago, I got a call from a friend who very excitedly told me that he had this amazing idea that he wanted to patent. Now, of course, I asked him what the idea was, and he simply refused to tell me because he thought I was going to steal his ideas. So he wanted me to tell him how to patent the idea without telling me what the idea was. If I had a rupee for every time someone came up to me and said that they had an amazing idea and wanted to patent it, I'd be a very happy person because I'd be a very rich person. Because I would not only get to tell them that that is not how it works, but also I would have a rupee for every time they told me that. And I would then have money from when they took consultancy from me. I'm a lawyer, folks. This is how we make our buck. But I thought that given the frequency with which I get these kind of questions, it may be a good idea to actually come and tell everyone what IPRs are and how you actually go about protecting them. So let's start from the basics, right? What are intellectual property rights? Well, first thing, let's separate two things, intellectual property from intellectual property rights. What is intellectual property? It is anything that you create, you make with the application of your mind. It's not physical, it's not tangible, it's not like land or fixed objects like this book. No, it is something that you make, that you put your creativity into. So this would be things like songs or books that you write. I know you're going to come at me and say book is physical, it's tangible, I can touch it. It's not about the book, the physical book itself, but what you have put into that book, the writing. That is the intellectual property. And the intellectual property rights would be the rights that protect the person who has made the creative output, right? To make it clearer, imagine you have a piece of land and you have land rights, the title over the land. Either you own the land or you have lease over the land so you can use it however. These are all different kinds of land rights. The land exists independent of the rights of the land, right? Similarly with intellectual property and intellectual property rights. The rights exist to protect the intellectual property. Why did we have intellectual property? It started off sometime during the Industrial Revolution when people started wanting to incentivize themselves for the creation of new things. Like Industrial Revolution was a time when a lot of new machines were coming up and a lot of new books were written. The printing press was invented, right? Because of the invention of printing press, a lot more books were starting to get published. So the question was, how do I protect something that I have written and I have put in all of this work in creating and benefit from it to the exclusion of the others? Because it's not fair that if I've put in all of the work, you get to enjoy that work for free. But at the same time, you couldn't have people monopolizing creativity, right? Because you wanted people to learn from things. You imagine you did a research paper and then you found out all of this amazing medicine related things. Example, vaccine, penicillin, the discovery of it. Imagine if somebody wrote a research paper on penicillin and then said, no, I'm not going to give anybody this information. I'm going to hoard it and not allow anybody else to benefit from it. To bring about a balance between incentivizing your creation and allowing the public to be able to use and benefit from that information is the reason and the genesis of intellectual property rights. Because if you see, IPRs don't protect you or your creation forever. There's always a time limit for IPR protection. The very reason for the duration of protection being limited is so that beyond a point, the public gets to enjoy it for free and you don't have to pay royalties for use of it. And the person who created it doesn't get to enjoy it forever and ever. Now, we'll get to the timelines and the duration of all of that another time, maybe in a different video. But basically, what you need to know is IPRs are limited. The protection is exclusive, meaning that you get to enjoy the benefits of what you've created to the exclusion of everybody else. But also, the duration of such protection is limited so that beyond a point, people do get to enjoy it. I'm sure you've realized that the classics, Emily Bronte, Jane Austen, Arthur Conan Doyle, their works are freely available on the internet because the copyright on their works expired a long time ago. Generally, the copyright protection duration is life plus X number of years. In India, it's about 60, which means that the copyright protection over the work of an author lasts about 60 years after their passing, which is potentially why you'll find a lot of free copies of these books, PDFs online. If you have been paying attention, there was some controversy over the copyright over Mickey Mouse expiring, the character Mickey Mouse expiring a couple of years ago, I think. However, people have found a way to protect Mickey Mouse as a character because it was apparently the copyright over the original drawing, the first ever rendition of Mickey Mouse expiring. Anyway, these are more complicated, more steeped in the legalese, unnecessary. What you do need to know is that there is protection for something that you've created, but that protection is not indefinite. It is for a particular duration of time that allows you the benefits of the creation for the work that you've put into it. But after the duration of protection passes, you do need to allow the public to use it because the public does need to benefit from the creation. Another reason for wanting to get works into the public domain is because the jurisprudence, or basically the thinking, is that you don't create in isolation. You've obviously borrowed from what is available. You've taken inspiration from nature, you've taken inspiration from people around you. Society has nurtured your creativity, and so you must give back to society, is somewhat the philosophy behind wanting things back in the public domain after the protection periods. Now, intellectual property rights are divided into many heads. There are possibly things that you've heard of, like copyrights, trademarks, patents, trade secrets. There are a couple that you might not have heard of, like designs and traditional knowledge. So let's talk about these different categories. Copyright. Copyright is where you protect your creative expression. Anything that you write, you draw, painting, photography, your pictures that you take, music, compositions, lyrics, the sound recording itself, film, video recording. You take a video and post it on Instagram as a reel. That is also copyright protected. All of these are essentially creative expressions and they're all protected by copyright. Next, trademarks. Trademarks is essentially your identity, your brand identity. For example, Some of Everything. Some of Everything is my trademark because it's my podcast, right? If somebody else were to do business under the name of Some of Everything or to start another podcast under the name of Some of Everything, I may have the right to sue them and say, hey, you're infringing my trademark if I have it registered. Or I can say you're trying to use my goodwill and reputation from the name that I have created using the name Some of Everything, and you're trying to gain unfair benefit out of it. So trademarks essentially protect your brand identity. Your name could be a trademark. The name of your business could be a trademark. We've had some very interesting cases where there are examples of colors being trademarked, like, for instance, the red sole of Louboutin shoes. They are a trademark. There are even auditory trademarks, like the sound of windows, the ta-na-na-na, that has been like the signing on and signing off of windows, the sound that you hear, that's an auditory trademark. Recently, there has even been a smell trademark that has been granted by the Indian Trademark Registry for Sumimoto's rose scented tires. That's cool, right? The shape of the Coca-Cola bottle, even that is a trademark because it's so distinctive that once you put the bottle and there's nothing on it, just the shape of the bottle, you know it's Coke. In fact, something really interesting that I read about recently was during the FIFA World Cup. I'm sure you're aware that a lot of stadiums have co-branded sponsorships. Essentially, you have like XYZ name of stadium, right? Some of these XYZ companies were not official sponsors of FIFA IPRs, the World Cup, but the stadiums were being used as venues. So what FIFA did was it blacked out the names of these companies if they were not sponsors. One such company used the blacking out of their logo on the stadium as an advantage to them because the shape of their logo was so iconic that even when blacked out, it was unmissable. I'm sure you all can guess which one it was. And if you don't know, it was Levi's. If you're interested, definitely read up about it. It was a very, very cool case, and it was advertisement and marketing done bang on right. So that's how you use trademarks. Now, patents. Patents are the overachieving or the more complicated cousins in the family of trademarks. Patents are what are used for inventions. Now, inventions could be technology related or they could be everyday objects. Things that you might not even have thought about are actually patented or were at some point, and the protection has since expired. Some very interesting cases, everyday objects, things you wouldn't dream of having IPR protection, right? Toilet paper rolls, very famous. Post-it notes, because somebody accidentally created a weak adhesive and it was completely useless until somebody else in that company decided to apply that and use it as bookmarks so that their pages won't move away. So that's how post-it notes were invented. Photocopying machines. And you can think of any machine and it's likely been patented or at least attempted to be patented once. In fact, processes can also be patented. Essentially, the eligibility for a patent is it has to be new, it has to be inventive, and it should be able to be applied on an industrial level. So, industrial application. At the end of this, you're going to be able to write an IPR paper, I promise. Next is designs. Designs or design patents, as they're known in the US, are more for the look and feel of an object. Design patents could be used in electronics. For example, the original iPhone design was a design patent. An interesting example was something that I have personally seen up close because I was working in the firm that handled this case was a case about the Crocs shoes. Crocs, people love it, people hate it, but you can't ignore it, right? Crocs, the specific pattern of the Crocs shoes, they wanted to patent it, but there was another entity that sued Crocs over infringement of their design and said that Crocs does not have a leg to stand on, pun intended, because they had infringed a design in the first place. It's a very famous case. You can look it up, read it up if you want to, but Crocs lost that one. So there are a lot of interesting cases like this. And if you were to dive deep into IPRs, there's a good chance you could lose yourself. But then you have trade secrets. Trade secrets are essentially super, super secret. Now, this is the only kind of IPR protection that can potentially last forever because it is essentially a secret. And the reason you keep it a secret is because your entire business depends on the secrecy of whatever the creation is, right? An example would be the recipes of Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Thumbs Up, KFC. Nobody knows what the 11 herbs and spices are. That's a trade secret. And even within the company, right, it would be so fiercely guarded and protected. Not everybody gets access to what the recipe is or even the ingredients that go into the recipe, let alone the process of making it. That is the beauty of trade secrets. You can have protection for trade secrets perpetually. And the only way to protect trade secrets is through a confidentiality agreement, but that is going into the details of all of this. I know you can blame the IPR lawyer for going into too much detail. But coming back to the original premise of this entire episode, right? Remember the idea that my friend talked about? Suppose it was an idea for an app. What do you think it could be protected under? Copyright? Trademarks? Patents? Designs? Trade secret? Hmm? If you said any of them, unfortunately, you'd be wrong. Because remember a couple of episodes ago, Wesa said this one sound you wish existed.
The sound of human beings when we finish a book and we close it and we hold it, that sound. I don't know what sound that is, but that sound.
I feel like you should write a song about that.
Okay.
Interesting.
Copyright, Wesa.
And I said, this. You can't copyright that, but that is a different episode. Yeah, this is that episode. Because, and I'm sorry to burst this bubble, ideas can't be protected under IPRs. Because what IPRs protect is the expression of creativity, not the idea of creativity itself. Now, I know this has potentially caused a little bit of confusion. So let's talk about it. In intellectual property jurisprudence, we have something called the idea expression dichotomy. I know lawyers come up with all kinds of fancy words to explain the simplest of things, but let me explain the simplest of things. You have an idea. The idea could be writing a play about two star-crossed lovers. What is that? Romeo and Juliet, essentially. Romeo and Juliet, there is Heer Ranja, there is Laila Majnu, there is West Side Story, there is Ram Leela. They're all expressions of the same idea of star-crossed lovers. Why can you say that none of them is infringing Romeo and Juliet? Because the expression of the play Romeo and Juliet is what is protected under copyright and not the idea of two star-crossed lovers finding it difficult, having families opposing their union, and finally ending up killing each other. The idea can't be protected, but the expression of the idea in whatever unique, creative way you think about expressing it, that is what deserves protection. Take your basic scenery painting, for example, right? Mountains, sun creeping out was, rising up from behind the mountains, grasslands, tree, house, grass, birds, tree, whatever. All of us have at some point made that painting. If the person who originally made that painting copyrighted that idea, none of us would have been able to make that painting. I mean, sure, we could make that painting, but we're not doing it legally. There are so many instances of songs sounding very similar, right? From an Indian context, they're potentially based on the same rag. Now, that rag is an idea. You use the notes of the rag, the aro and the avroh, to create a combination of notes, melody that could then be considered an original composition. And that original composition will then have copyright protection. Your lyrics in a song have separate protection. Music in a song has separate protection. And the sound recording itself that you make, that has separate protection. So I hope that explains what the idea expression dichotomy is. Basically, IPRs do not protect the idea, but rather the creative expression, the unique creative expression of the idea. So to take you back to the idea for the app that my friend had, that idea can't be protected. In fact, a lot of times people misuse the word patent because what they actually mean is they want to protect their creation or even their idea. So hopefully this episode gave you a little bit of clarity on what the different categories of intellectual property rights are and what you can protect. Not the idea, the expression. But the very basics of intellectual property rights would be incomplete without talking about how you can protect your creations. But that is another episode. So, folks, do tune in to the next episode to know how your idea for a book or play or song or the lyrics in your head or that idea for the app that you have can be protected. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something from it. Do let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and the IPR lawyer day job person over here will try and answer them to the best of her ability. But let me know if you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.